The Senate, after days of brinkmanship, internal Democratic turmoil, and a Republican-led game of chicken, narrowly averted a government shutdown at the stroke of midnight. The final vote, 54-46. This was a high-stakes chess match where Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and 9 other Senate Democrats made a calculated decision to back a Republican-crafted stopgap funding bill, effectively silencing a filibuster attempt from within their own party. Meanwhile, at the Department of Justice, Donald Trump, never one to shy away from biblical melodrama, took the stage to rail against what he called the weaponization of justice under President Biden. But let's get real. It was the same Trump who vowed in no uncertain terms to use the power of the presidency to exact retribution on his own opponents. It's what he ran on. And in the background of all of this, another scandal brewed, this time involving a Signal group chat where a Trump national security advisor, in what can only be described as a stunning act of incompetence, accidentally invited a journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor of The Atlantic, to a conversation about military plans. You can't make this stuff up. And if that weren't enough, on Capitol Hill, House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan, busy briefing Trump on what he had seen as the so-called aggressive push against the administration's policies that federal judges, by the way, had blocked for their sheer lawlessness. Jordan and his allies have been licking their wounds from an inability to actually impeach judges, and they've been scheming up new ways to weaken the courts. So much for law and order. Joining me today is a political giant who has seen it all, the legendary Representative Jim Clyburn of South Carolina's 6th Congressional District. Clyburn has been a towering figure in Democratic politics, a kingmaker who has shaped the course of presidential primaries in 2020 and fought to protect the very soul of the Democratic Party. Thank you so much for being a part of the political mic, Congressman Clyburn, again.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Congressman Clyburn, let's start with the sheer hypocrisy on the Republican side. Republicans spent years screaming about Hillary Clinton's emails in 2015 and 2016. Yet when Trump's team literally invites a journalist into a Signal chat discussing military strikes, suddenly they're making excuses. They're saying it's not a big deal. They're emphasizing the fact that no national security information was compromised or intercepted. No investigations except for one. You have Senator Roger Wicker calling for investigation, but so far no hearings, no outrage from Jim Jordan or James Comer. What does this say about the GOP's so-called commitment to national security? And more importantly, how do Democrats hammer this point home to voters who might not be following every twist and turn?
Well, it says a whole lot, and it doesn't say much. The fact of the matter is, I think the American people are quite aware that this president operates outside of the law. This president takes a position that very few rules apply to him. He has operated that way, and he seems to have had a premonition that the United States Supreme Court will condone that. And because that's what the Supreme Court did in this decision, giving him almost complete immunity, no matter what he may do. And that's the way he's operating. And until there's a check on his authority, we're in for a wild ride. Now, I made a statement way back when he was president the first time that he was operating as if he did not plan to give up the office. Yeah. Now, a lot of people went after me for saying that. In fact, I said it on CNN, and Bob Lemon was hosting. And Bob Lemon asked me, "Are you calling this man Putin?" I says, "No. He's I'm sorry." He asked me, calling him Hitler. I said, "No. Mussolini is Hitler. I mean, Putin is Hitler. He is Mussolini." Now, if you go back and look at the history in Germany, in Italy, I think you can draw the same conclusion. And a lot of people are beginning to say things like that now. And I think that we're at a point now where he's operating as if he's not going to pay any attention to what the judges say. We just saw the Speaker of the House making a statement, I understand, on yesterday, that they're looking for a way to eliminate federal judges. You say you can't make this stuff up? This you cannot make up. And they're absolutely believing that. And so I think that they're trying to lay the foundation for an autocracy, and I would hope the voters will intervene, and they're going to get opportunities next week. First up in Wisconsin, with that Supreme Court race up in Wisconsin. There'll be some special elections going on for Congress. So I think the voters will have to intercede, no matter what we Democrats do. I used to be in the news business, so I know that no matter what you may tell me, if I'm writing the story, I'm gonna put what lead I want to put on it, and that's what is happening to Democrats. We may tell the story, but we don't control the Washington Post. We just saw the Washington Post, the owner, not letting the editors endorse Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I mean, so is that the Democrats' fault? No. And so I'm saying to people all the time, don't ask me what the Democrats going to do. What are we going to do as a society? Are we going to tolerate these wealthy billionaires telling us what we can read and what we can't read? If you're going to tolerate that, what Democrat can do anything about that? So that's where we are. It's not just about Democrats here. This is about whether or not we are going to have a society that is in pursuit of a more perfect union, or whether or not we are going to give up on that search.
And we keep hearing Republicans rage about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI hires, claiming that diversity efforts somehow weaken our institutions. But when you look at Pete Hegseth, you see someone who's unqualified. He's not someone who was rising in the ranks of the military or the Pentagon. He's not someone who is a well familiar military strategist. He was a Fox News host. No military strategy experience, no Pentagon credentials, just a Fox News mouthpiece who got rewarded for flattering Trump. Now he's at the center of an actual national security scandal. How do Democrats expose the double standard? And do you think the media has done enough to hold them accountable?
Well, the media has not done enough. And let me give you an example. You just used the word, and the media been using this word about this release. And you keep putting the word in there, they accidentally did this. Who says they accidentally did it? Who says that somebody in that group didn't include this media person? I'm not buying it that it was accidental. These guys, when you look at what they were saying and how they were saying it, it's like, this is what we're going to do at 12:01. This is what we're going to do at 12:02. Why do you need to be saying that? What was that all about? Let the people who are going to conduct the offense, that's their business. So we ought to ask ourselves, why were they having this conversation? It sounds like they were amusing each other rather than running the country. Yes, we got a Secretary of Defense now that is incompetent as anybody that's ever held any office. And look who he's succeeding. One of the most accomplished soldiers this country ever produced. Then he comes in and fires another very accomplished soldier in the name of DEI. Well, I had to deal with this in the committee on yesterday. We had a hearing yesterday when someone on the panel implied that DEI, that when the president said the DEI had something to do with that plane accident out at the Washington airport several weeks ago, that came up in the discussion on yesterday. And then one of my colleagues used a court case to support what the president said. And I asked about people like Arthur Gregg and Charity Adams. What used to be Fort Lee is now Fort Gregg Adams. Who was Gregg? A lieutenant general in the United States Army. Who was Adams? A lieutenant colonel and then later colonel in the United States Army. Both black, both from South Carolina. An independent committee from the Department of Defense came up with the idea that this fort should have those two names. Was that DEI? Had nothing to do with DEI. It had to do with their service. They're both now deceased, and they had never heard of DEI. But that's what we have to do. You have to confront them. And I asked them, was it DEI when John Glenn asked those women to come and go through this stuff, this mathematical calculations with him, want to know whether those black women, whether or not they agreed with the calculations? He said he was not comfortable getting in that spaceship unless these women can make him comfortable, which they did, and he succeeded. That wasn't DEI. That's not merit. They made a whole movie about it with the Hidden Figures. Was it DEI when those red tails, Tuskegee Airmen, when fighter pilots were not comfortable going in to a fight unless they were being accompanied by those red tails? That's merit. And so anytime, we can't let these people get away with this. We got to confront them. So I wasn't going to let them get out of that committee yesterday without confronting them with what is real. Now, the DEI is on Trump's part. Division, exclusion, insults. That's the DEI he knows. D for division, E for exclusion, and I for insults. He's a master at it.
Yeah. And I would say D for dangerous, E for embarrassing, and I for incompetent too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But Congressman, the young people have just witnessed another battle over the congressional budget. They watched this chaotic brawl unfold, and the message that many received was that a Republican spending bill, which handed Donald Trump and Elon Musk a victory, gave them unchecked power over government funding. And there seems to be some disillusionment with government, and it seems to be sky high among Gen Z. How do Democrats counter the cynicism and prove that their votes actually do matter in a system that feels rigged, feels as if they're powerless? There are many calling for Senator Schumer to step aside and make way for new leadership. Nancy Pelosi, who's former the Speaker Emeritus, seemed to have criticized him by saying she wouldn't give away anything for nothing. But then she also said, no, of course he should remain as the minority leader. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not going to say whether or not he should remain as minority leader because, when I was coming along in politics, I used to have a saying that I would repeat very often. There is no substitute for substance. I don't say that anymore because in the world within which we live today, style, and I don't mean this the way it sounds, style trumps substance. And that is what happened here. I think that what Schumer did was not to be unexpected, but the way he did it posed a problem. And the problem was he made a complete 180-degree turn in a 24-hour period. We on the House side heard from him that the Senate was going to hold and not allow the vote to go forward. That's what we were prepared for. And 24 hours later, he not only let the vote go, he voted that way. And he blindsided the leader, the House leader, Hakeem Jeffries. And so it wasn't what he did, it was the way he did it that caused the problem. And so none of us, on the reconciliation, you only need 51 votes to do anything. What we were, they had to have 60 votes to proceed on that vote. So the thing was denied in the 60 votes. Now he says he saw this as being unchecked power that the president would have. Well, it seems to me that he's firing people, closing agencies, and what's checked about that? He's doing it before we ever pass the bill. So I just think that Schumer made a tremendous misstep in that instance, and I hope we can work through it.
Could you shed some light on this administration's surgical intent, it looks, to defund Black America? You had President Trump rescinding Executive Order 11246, which was a Lyndon Johnson executive order designed to promote diversity and prevent discrimination in federal workspaces. That's rescinded. You have even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming out today announcing that 20,000 positions in the Department of Health and Human Services have been removed. There's a gutting of the federal agency, the Department of Education. Trump recently signed an executive order designed to try to dismantle the Department of Education. And there are many saying, well, this is not going to affect minorities because we're just shifting certain responsibilities to other agencies like the Small Business Administration and et cetera. How do you cut through all the noise and really explain to folks that this is actually a surgical intent to kneecap Black America economically, educationally, socially, to make sure that all of the infrastructure that was in place to try to have some semblance of equality is being removed?
Well, thank you very much. I really, really think you framed this perfectly. And I would hope more people will see that these things are not operating in silos. And you just came forth with a great example. I did a town hall last night on Social Security. And one of the things I confronted was this whole notion that I've heard my Republican friends say to young people: this Social Security is going broke, it's not going to be there for you. Well, I say to young people, Social Security is there for you right now. If you are 30-year-old, you got parents and grandparents on Social Security, and Social Security affects Medicare, and they may need Medicaid. It's helping you right now, because if your parents and grandparents did not have Social Security and no longer living in their productive years, who will take care of them but you? So if Social Security is not there as a benefit to you and your young family, then that's going to be another burden on you. So Social Security is helping you right now, irrespective of whether or not it's around when you get to be older. It's there for you right now if you see your place in this. So don't let these wedges being placed between you and your parents and grandparents. That's what they're doing. And so none of this operates in a silo. When they're cutting the Department of Education, then it means that the Title III programs that help 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, your 3, 4, and 5-year-old, your grandparents ain't got no 3 or 4 or 5-year-old. You got that 3, 4, 5-year-old, and it's being funded by the Department of Education. You get rid of that, then it's rid of preschool for your children. And so you can't let these people pit you against the other generation. None of this is operating in a silo. Even if you look at Medicaid, they're talking about cutting Medicaid. Everybody said, well, that's for low income people. I'm all right because I ain't low income. Well, 75% of Medicaid money is in nursing homes. And all you got to do is keep living. And you see whether or not it affects you. So I just think that a lot of design, a lot of thinking has gone into putting the government together that works for all. And if you allow them to pick off a silo at the time, I'm sitting over in this silo, so what's going on over there ain't got nothing to do with me. Oh, yeah, it's got a whole lot to do with you. And you're going to find out very soon. I'm hopeful that we can turn this around. I'm hopeful that the courts will step in to preserve this democracy, but I'm not sure. Because the last time the country was here, and the country was in this place before, I'm amused when I hear people say all the time, it's never been like this before. Yes, it was. You just wasn't here. Back in 1876, when the election was thrown into the House of Representatives and the great betrayal took place that we call the Tilden Hayes Compromise. You just wasn't here, but it took place. You wasn't here when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president and gave pardons to all of those Confederates, just like the president just gave pardons to all those insurrectionists. Yeah, we've been here before. I can walk you through this history that you don't have time for today, and I can let people know that everything they're seeing today did happen before.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I always say I believe the spirit of the MAGA movement, the rebellious spirit willing to overtake the government, is the very descendant of the Confederate spirit. In fact, in the Confederate and during the Civil War, the Confederate flag didn't even get into the Capitol Hall the way it did on January the 6th.
Absolutely, never did, never did. And your listeners and viewers, I don't know exactly how this thing goes out to people, but they might be interested in knowing what we call a Confederate battle flag was never adopted. What we call it the Confederate flag, it is a battle flag they use on the battlefield, but that was never the Confederate flag. That people were so embarrassed by all that. Even Robert E. Lee, when he surrendered at Appomattox, he said to the people of the South, furl your flags and put them in the attic. It's just these insurrectionists went up into the attic and grabbed that flag and brought it out here into the Capitol. So you're so right, and I'm glad you put it that way. I don't know whether the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, but they all flow from the Confederates. That's all MAGA is. The same Confederate spirit is still with us today.
Congressman, there's so many Republicans who are angry over the crush of court rulings against the Trump administration. Republicans in Congress have been trying to slap back at the federal judiciary with proposals to limit the reach of its rulings and cut funding, even impeach judges, many of whom President Biden put in place. And all of the criticism Biden got for being sleepy and old, he put more federal judges on the bench than any other president. And could you speak to the Republican effort to remove all checks and balances to ensure that they're not being stopped by these quote unquote pesky courts that are getting in their way to have total control to enact their agenda from the state level all the way to the federal level?
I don't know how big the cabal is, but a cabal exists that decided how to dismantle this democracy, and that's what's going on here. When you see people saying, you can't fact check me, here is the President of the United States saying, I ought to be able to operate my office in darkness, that you're not going to be allowed to shine a light on what I'm doing. I ought to be able to make decisions, and this cabinet is out here saying these federal judges can't tell the president what to do. You know, when you look at, and I wondered about this when it first came to, I used to teach history in the public schools. And all of a sudden I woke up one day and someone said to me, we don't teach civics in our schools anymore. We don't teach the government, the three branches of government, three separate branches, three equal branches. We aren't teaching that anymore. And it's coming clear now that we know the plan for that to exist anymore. There's a little cabal somewhere who are saying that the judiciary is not equal to the executive. The executive is supreme. You may not call the president king, but he should operate as a king. That's what this notion is all about. And so I would say to your listeners, don't get carried away with this foolishness. Because there's one thing about having a kingdom. You talk about birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment. Well, you talk about birthright autocracy. The king's children and grandchildren become the rulers. It's not the people who are being ruled. And if this transition to a monarchy from a democracy continues, and that seems to be the road we're on, then there won't be any more elections in this country, and they'll be handing down authority by birth.
And you already have Congressman Andy Ogles introducing legislation to allow or pave the way for Trump to run for a third term, and conveniently it prevents Obama. You have Steve Bannon coming out last weekend saying they're looking for ways to get around the 22nd Amendment so that Trump can run in 2028. So this is not hyperbole anymore. A lot of people, oh no, you're just making noise and you're just trying to scare me into voting for your party. No, this is real. This is as real as it gets. I'm imagining a scenario where, say, it's like the election of 2000 and in the 2028 election, and there's no clear winner on election night. And Trump says, well, for this, being that there's no clear winner, I'll stay in office for as long as it takes. Can you see that happening?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I meant when I said way back in 2017. In 2017, the night before Trump made his first state a joint speech to the legislature, to the Congress, I said then, this man is not planning to give up this office. Everything you hear now points to the fact that he is not planning to give up this office. And that's why they're trying to lay the foundation now for him not to obey a court decision that may come against his will or his actions. Yes, I can see that. And I've been telling people, back in the 60s when I was going to jail and getting locked up for resisting the status quo, I've sat in jail several times, never afraid that what I was doing would not result in a good outcome. My whole thing was, I'm going through this. I'm going to spend a few nights in jail. I'll get out, and my children and grandchildren will not have to live the way my parents and grandparents lived. I'm not too sure about that today. I do have fear as to whether or not the system holds. The 1954 Supreme Court decision was a 9-0 decision. All 9 justices saying segregation is per se unconstitutional. You ain't getting that kind of the decision today. We're somewhere back, the Dred Scott decision was a 7-2 decision. even 2 people felt that Dred Scott was being done wrong, but 7 people said no, Dred Scott gonna go back into slavery. And so that same Supreme Court that ruled 7-2 against Dred Scott just ruled 6-3 against some of our current interests. So the question is, will the next one be 7-2, or will we go back in the other direction and get at least a 5-4 decision in favor of maintaining this pursuit of a more perfect union? That is what is at play here, whether or not the system will hold. I'm not sure it will. I certainly hope it does.
And because, to your point, I've been saying, I just don't see turning to the federal courts as a realistic way to get some kind of intervention. Just last week, Trump called for the impeachment of U.S. District Judge James Bogsberg, not because he failed to disclose luxury trips paid by a Republican mega donor, not because he accepted a 2008 Alaska fishing trip furnished by a billionaire, not because his wife was involved in efforts to overturn the U.S. presidential election on January the 6th, but because he dared to issue a temporary restraining order that halts the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to expedite deportations of Venezuelan gang members. And this is Trump calling for there to be no checks on him at all as the executive branch. And we've seen that you have orders on the books and he just does not care.
That's right.
He ignored that ruling. He ignored, another ruling from a federal court to not support a specific doctor. He ignored that. It's as if he's just totally blatantly disregarding Article 3 judges. Just to pull up the record, he was told to halt deportations. He simply refused. The federal judge ordered the planes be turned around. He ignored it. He left Venezuelans stranded in El Salvador. A federal judge in Massachusetts ruled that a doctor from Brown University, a kidney transplant specialist with a valid work visa, should not be deported within 48 hours without notice. Didn't care about that. He responded by saying she's already gone. When another federal judge demanded that the administration restore funding to USAID, he said no. When a federal judge in Maryland ruled that all federal funding frozen from universities and organizations promoting DEI should be restored, he refused again. So this is where we are. Court orders sit on the books, and Trump simply does not care, and there seems to be no repercussion at all.
Up until this point, there has not been. The only favorable rulings thus far has been temporary. And of course, no matter what they may do at the district court level or the Court of Appeals, all of this is going to end up in the United States Supreme Court. Now, I've going to say today what I've said to some friends of mine. It remains to be seen whether or not Justice Roberts will take a seat alongside Earl Warren, or whether or not he could take a seat alongside Justice Taney. Justice Taney, who wrote the opinion in Dred Scott, who most experts say is the worst Supreme Court decision ever. And of course, Earl Warren wrote the opinion in Brown v. Board of Education. So we'll have to wait to see which vision for the future Chief Justice Roberts will have. I certainly hope it's Earl Warren's vision. I don't think he can get the Thurgood Marshall.
You had Speaker Johnson daring Democrats to let the government shut down. In 2013, Republicans paid a huge price, a political price, for shutting down the government over Obamacare. This time, Johnson dared Democrats to oppose their bill, essentially saying, go ahead and shut it down and take the blame. Do you think that if Democrats went ahead and allowed that to happen, that they would have been to blame? Or do you think because Republicans are now controlling all branches of government, that they would have been actually?
Well, if you look at the polling that took place going into that, 31% of the American people blamed the Republicans, and 22% of that same group blame Trump. That's 53% Republican. And those 32% blame Democrats. Now, so when you look at it in a cumulative way, more of the American people would have been blaming Republicans than Democrats. That's one of the reasons I had a problem with that. That those 6 months extension, or even a 2-month extension, I think is what it should have been put on the table by the Republicans. If the government were to get shut down, it would be reopened one way or the other. So I don't know whether or not the Democrats would have been blamed or not. I did look at the polling taking place, and it just seemed to me, yeah, 32% of the people said it was our fault, but 53% said it was their fault.
And what are your thoughts on Elon Musk's, unofficial yet consequential role in this administration? I don't think that you can really look to any precedent to see a private citizen like this rising to such prominence simply because of the fact that he donated $250 million to the campaign. A direct investment in his tax cut that they're trying to get through. The Trump tax cuts expire this year. Yet, there's already been moves to damage the economy. His reckless and unprovoked trade wars with China, with Canada and Mexico. The Houston Chronicle, the Houston Chronicle, I believe, reported that the last set of tariffs that the United States engaged in with China cost the average taxpayer $316 billion. And you still have Republicans saying, well, this is a short-term measure. It's not going to affect the economy. We're going to see progress. We're going to see economic growth. And the Federal Reserve, which was expecting the rate of inflation to continue to decrease from its trajectory since Biden was in office, is now looking like it's slowing down in its predictions. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's role and Trump's unprovoked tariffs?
Well, I think that as far as Elon Musk is concerned, I call my memoir published back in 2015, Blessed Experiences. And I said in the introduction to that book, all of my experiences have not been pleasant, but I've considered all of them to be blessings. And I conclude that all of us are but the sum total of our experiences. I don't care what you may think you are, who you may think you are. You can be no more or less than what your experiences allow you to be. So Musk is no more or less than his born in South Africa's apartheid, on the wrong side of that apartheid. That's who he is. And so we just have to come to grips with that. He is supposedly the richest man in the world. And he sees nothing but numbers and not people. There are no people attached to his numbers. Those of us who operate in government, and I say this a lot, and I found myself in the last couple of days saying it very often. Government should not be run like a business, because a business exists to make a profit. Government exists to provide service. We call it the Postal Service. But now, all of a sudden, a few businessmen have got together and said, we want to privatize the post office. We're going to make sure that if you get your mail, somebody got to make a profit. They want to privatize the veteran services. So in case you need benefits as a veteran, having fought a war, or maybe more than one war. I know people who've been in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan 3 and 4 times. But if you're going to need some service at the age of 70 or 75, we got to make sure that somebody makes a profit. if you're going to get your veterans benefits. That is what is happening here. And so I tell people all the time, when someone tells you they want to run government like a business, you need to stay away from them, because those people mean you no good. If you got a parent or grandparent that worked for 40 years and now at the age of 75 need Social Security, said no, we need to privatize Social Security, which is what George W. Bush tried to do, privatize Social Security. And what's so funny about that, at the time he was trying to privatize Social Security, it was at the time when that guy named Madoff up there in New York made off with all them people's money off the stock market. Can you imagine what would have happened to the Social Security trust fund if Madoff has gotten his hand on that trust fund? So we cannot allow these rich people who feel entitled. You had the guy who the Commerce Secretary, someone told me he's worth $4 billion. And he's comparing a low 75-year-old waiting on a Social Security check so that she can pay their rent or purchase groceries. And he says anybody that get upset about missing a Social Security payment is a scammer. So you don't think anybody that's paying their rent every month with a Social Security check will be a scammer if that check didn't show up on time for them to pay the rent? Come on. They don't have these life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They've never had to sit down with a grandmama to help her fill out a form for Social Security benefits, or a great uncle who want to get veterans benefits. And all these forms you got to fill out. They've never had to do that. So when you got a billionaire guy worth $4 billion saying that his mother-in-law would not mind missing if the Social Security check came late. Yeah, I guess so. If you got a son-in-law worth $4 billion, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that we've got to really get people to understand. And I think programs like yours, informing the public, is exactly what we need now. It has to get through that no matter what I may say, if I say it to you, you're going to report it. If I say it to the Fox News reporter, and if I know they're Fox News, I don't talk to them.
Yeah.
Because I know they go misreport what I say.
Exactly. Exactly. And we need a fourth estate more than ever. I mean, that the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Goldberg handled those documents, the national security information, better than the people who are hired to do that. But before I let you go, Congressman Clyburn, we saw Donald Trump berate a U.S. ally in the Oval Office, disrespect him. You saw J.D. Vance chiming in for good measure. We stopped giving intelligence to Ukraine. Donald Trump has already taken a position in this war, and they told you in the campaign what they're going to do. They want to resort to appeasement for Russia. I predict personally that by the end of this year, United States under Donald Trump will be giving intelligence to Russia. I hope I'm wrong. What do you think about how we're treating Zelensky and Ukraine in this conflict, and then his language of trying to, this bombastic language of, we're going to make Canada the 51st state, we're going to annex Greenland. All of this is music to Putin's ears.
Well, unfortunately, I agree with you that the appeasement of Russia is the kind of thing I never thought I would see. I don't know what I thought the future would hold, but I often think about Nikita Khrushchev, who had the position when I was a youngster that Putin has now. And Khrushchev made the big statement that I think about every day. we will bury you. That's what he said to the United States of America. We will bury you. Now, most people I know see Putin as an inheritor of that notion from that Russian leader, and that he has envisions of putting that old empire back together. And that's what Ukraine is a part of. You know, I've been to Ukraine, and I tell you, I was heartbroken when I saw all of those buildings being destroyed. The prettiest buildings I ever seen in my life in Ukraine, over in Latvia, Estonia. I've been to Georgia. I spent a week down in Tbilisi, Georgia, and all of this is just being torn apart. Khrushchev doesn't care. I mean, Putin doesn't care. He's carrying out that notion expressed by Khrushchev decades ago to try to put the old Soviet Union back together and carry out the notion. No matter what he may be saying to Trump now, his aim is to bury the United States of America. That's what his aim is. And he's decided that Trump is the best tool by which to do that.
Well, Representative Clyburn, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on. Thank you so much for the time that you spent on the political mic and for being so informative.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Keep up the good fight, and thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, buddy. I'll do my best. Thank you.
All right. With that being said, that's going to conclude this week's episode of the Political Mic Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mic Podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.